Hi everyone, I'm Niamh, and I'm here today to talk to you about mobile teams working together and how this can help both your career as a whole, but also your team and, in the long run, the product that you're working on. So, who actually am I, and how do I vaguely know that what I'm working on? Firstly, I'm working as a mobile engineer on both Android and iOS at the bank in the UK called Monzo. If you don't know what Monzo is, it's very similar to N26 here in Germany or Revolut. It's an app-based bank that doesn't have any branches with a particular focus on the user experience. I'm also a Firebase GDE. I take a particular focus on how Firebase can help mobile teams work better together and help reduce the number of tools that you have to use in your mobile development cycle. I've also worked at a lot of agencies in the past, so working at a lot of different types of companies, different teams, different cultures, and gleaning what works and doesn't work from these experiences has helped me build what I'm going to be talking about. So to start, people tend to go on a lot about iOS versus Android, which flagship's better, what company's better, who's got the better product, blah, blah, which I think is fine if you want as a consumer, but I think as developers, we have a responsibility to care about both. If one of your apps is a lot better than the other, you're going to be annoying potentially half of your user base, particularly in the UK, which isn't an ideal experience. So, talking a little bit about statistics, this is the UK market share by platform. It's quite an unusual one in Europe, in that Android and iOS are pretty much equal in terms of their share, and that's changed quite a lot recently. However, because of this long-term thing where iOS is more popular, there's still a perception that it still is, and that more people have iPhones, and this permeates into a company's attitude to an app's development. Be it senior stakeholders only interested in seeing the iOS product, or designers only owning iPhones and only producing iOS designs, it makes developing an Android app in the UK potentially frustrating at times. However, it's good to see this is changing. It really shows the importance of having good collaboration between developers and designers and having these teams closer together. In comparison, this is Germany statistics, quite a lot different. It's quite interesting, actually, whereas Android has a much higher percentage of the market share. However, this doesn't mean we should just relax and just assume that we're okay as Android developers. There will be problems with this way as well. So, why exactly should we care about this as developers? You might be asking. Firstly, having apps that make all our users happy and comfortable with your product, and having an app that's usable on both platforms and what people are used to, will improve the reputation of your company. Users really vote with their downloads in this sort of thing. People appreciate a good user experience. In terms of developers, though, and working as a team, we all lose when mobile teams don't work together. So, nice empty slide. Firstly, the quality of our work will suffer. Having more eyes and ideas when developing can only improve our code bases. Communication, having cross-functional teams can allow for more conversations on the best way to implement a potential solution, which leads into teamwork. Pair programming across platforms can improve team morale and also improve the quality of our apps by being able to spot problems earlier. And obviously, it's not just about teams not working together. It's little things like the designs only being for one platform, so one set of developers have to interpret it. Or your app only being on one platform for an extended amount of time, which means one is always trying to catch up. And it's also having the bigger picture in mind. How is your product viewed as a whole, and how is your company or team culture affecting that? So, in terms of teams, a common structure at some companies, I mean this is changing, but is to have teams formed by their discipline. So you might have an iOS team, Android team, design, product, etc. This tends to mean that when one team's finished with their work, they'll pass it on to the next team, and so on and so forth. This causes issues when, say, you get to the engineering phase and the developer has a problem with just a tiny implementation from the designer that doesn't work on that platform has to go all the way back, and then the communication lines aren't really there and set up for that, which just slows everyone down and ends up with everyone getting more stressed than they need to be. So at Monzo, we have cross-disciplinary squads, which are responsible for a certain feature set or area of the product. So I'm in the lending squad, well, lending collective with a loan squad inside that, so we're responsible for the loan product. A typical product squad will have 1 or 2 Android and iOS engineers, a few back-end engineers, designer, copywriter, QA, product manager, sometimes data analyst, or someone from legal if it's needed. The structure of these teams isn't set in stone and varies depending on the business area. Some won't have any Android and iOS engineers if it's more back-end focused. We find this gives the teams the autonomy and speed to deliver and ensures that there's a tight feedback loop between the members, and also gives people an opportunity to take up leadership roles and being in a safe environment in order to grow and learn how to do this. So it's beneficial for quite a lot of different ways, really. Also, having developers working on the same features across platforms at the same time can assist with testing, and bugs found on one platform may be able to be avoided on the other. Don't know what it's doing. Hang on. Okay. Additionally, being in sync with the other parts of the business, having features going out at the same time, or at least in the same sort of time frame, they're never exactly the same, and context being recent, the marketing team can have a more consistent message, and customers won't get frustrated when one platform has something and then it takes weeks and weeks for it to appear on the other, and not a lot of communication because no one really knows what's going on. Having a diversity in the roles and people during ideation sessions helps spur creativity and can also ensure that your product meets the needs of more people. Alongside this, working with a range of different people can help improve work satisfaction, resulting in happier developers and consequently faster and higher quality development. This point also links back to one of my initial ones of communication. Cross-functional teams foster a culture of good communication, ensure that knowledge is shared, and awareness of problems and successes aren't restricted to just those dealing with them. So yeah, following on from that with communication, I think this is probably one of the most important aspects. In particular, if you have distributed workers, so remote, being able to communicate effectively becomes a vital part of your workflow. So in most tech companies, I imagine most of us here use Slack day to day, and I think using that to its full potential is really important. At Monzo in particular, we have quite a few different techniques to improve our workflows within Slack, and also to avoid too much context switching and keep everyone feeling closer together. So one of these techniques is using something we call semantic emojis. These allow you to quickly see the main points in a Slack channel and easily access the threads you might be more needed in. This stops knowledge being siloed into too many channels, while also reducing noise if there's information that you might want to see, but you're not particularly need to be fully engaged with. So these are some of the main ones that we use. So we have obviously the Android and iOS ones to signify an Android and iOS problem or question. The back arrow is for back end. We've got the palette for design. The 2 question marks, the red one's for one that you want an answer for right now. It's quite urgent. Grey is for one that you're happy to wait a few hours, and then obviously the bug for any bug-related problems. We have quite a few others, it depends on channel, but each channel has a key and linking off to what's acceptable, etc. So these are particularly useful in our mobile channels. Something that Monzo's done recently is, now that the Android team is the same size as iOS, is to combine all of our Slack channels. So there used to be an Android and iOS separate channel. However, now we have a mobile eng and mobile chit channel. So everything goes in there. We don't have any separation. So this has meant that the teams are quite a lot closer. We all know each other. We all know who each other are. And it means you can see the problems and general questions that come up from the other platform's development, and vice versa for iOS developers. We also utilize Slack bots in these channels for reminders, for, say, this one is for the release cut. But Android and iOS ones go in here as well. So it's a really nice way of just getting visibility. We also have a mobile PR channel. This is mostly just one that you check into every now and then. But it basically just shares every single pull request that's opened on any of the mobile repositories, both on Android and iOS. We also use emojis here. I think this is a company-wide thing with the GitHub integration. So the animals indicate how big it is, so ranging from mouse all the way to dinosaur, which I think is encouraged not to be used, but hey-ho. So something's weird with some of the pictures in my slides, but anyway, I was going to talk about meetings here. In terms of we've started having a mobile all hands, which is like a monthly or bi-monthly meeting to combine all the mobile teams together and generally chat about anything cool that we've worked on. We're only testing this out at the moment, but it seems to be working quite well so far. We involve QA in this as well, so it's a really nice way of making them feel more like they're part of the engineering team. So we also have iOS and Android chat separately too, so for things that might be a bit more platform specific, which you do have to have. So things that are more like, do we want to change the way we do this architecture, blah, blah. But anyone's welcome to attend these meetings, so I'll tend to try and attend both of them if I've got time. Another thing we've started using for questions is Stack Overflow for Teams. This is basically a private space on Stack Overflow, where basically you log in with your Monzo Google account and you can ask questions and it will automatically post into Slack. So this is an example of the Slack bot. This posts it into the mobile ends channel and you can suggest people to answer it or comment. I think it leaves an automatic emoji reaction depending on what happens with it. So if there's comments or whether it's been answered. But yeah, this has really helped smooth out our question-making process. And it means that anyone new coming into the team can have that bank of questions as we build that up for any questions that they might have, so they don't have to repeat themselves or go searching through Slack. Because when there's like 2 or 3 years of history on Slack, it gets a bit hard. So another thing we use in terms of sharing knowledge is something called proposals. We generally make these when we have an idea or a potential implementation we might not be too sure on. So it might detail like a general architecture we might follow or like an API spec. It can be anything really. This is then shared with the mobile team, which gives chance for people in different squads to make comments on the way something might be implemented and share their thoughts. It's a really good way of starting to get feedback before you actually start development and not just when you open the pull request at the end. It also means when you open the pull request at the end, you can link back to the proposal and it just gives the reviewer even more context. So these are really good. And being able to see like the Android and the iOS ones, sometimes we'll make joint ones in a squad. So when we're making the same thing, we'll make a mobile implementation proposal and share logic there, which is really cool. So linking into that, I think as well as communicating with iOS developers, mostly in this case, having a knowledge and basic understanding of their work is greatly beneficial too, as it can provide opportunities to pair on similar problems and help fix bugs. Being a cross-platform developer myself, I've found it quite helpful to aid the entire team. So when we're brainstorming ideas to investigating bugs, being able to at least have an understanding of what's possible on Android or iOS. If the other developer isn't around or like you're easier placed to answer a question, it's much more convenient. At Monzo, we encourage developers to work with their Android or iOS counterpart, and we have a general culture of collaboration. So developer and a general thinking that developers working alone only restricts their creativity and limits the potential solutions to problems. So to aid with this, we'll try and do pair programming, sometimes across platforms recently, to share knowledge. This is something we can do more of, I think, but I think it really depends on the type of company that you're in, how fast-paced everything is, etc. But by encouraging this cross-platform development, we bring new ideas to each side, which can only benefit our code quality and knowledge. And also, with Kotlin becoming so popular and more common, the disparities between the platforms are becoming less and less. There's really not as many excuses now to not even have an inkling of what goes on the other platform. The syntax between Kotlin and Swift is remarkably similar, and it really isn't a huge task for an iOS or Android developer to start learning the other platform, or at least be able to form opinions on the other platform's code. So I thought I'd take this opportunity to demonstrate just how similar Kotlin and Swift are, and how there really isn't much of a barrier to start learning some Swift if you're comfortable with Kotlin already. This first example is just some variable declarations. So as you can see, the only difference is how we declare an immutable value with let on iOS and val on Android. And then for a class, single value and a function. Is it a function? Yeah. The only difference is the Kotlin being able to make the function declaration a bit smaller. But in terms of how they read, it's really, really similar. So it's only like platform-specific APIs that you need to get a bit more your head around a little bit, but it's really not a lot. A for loop, checking the type of an item. So aside from the syntax for incrementing a value, the only difference is the requirement for brackets in Kotlin. It's a bit ridiculous, really. It's cool, though. And then a protocol in Swift or an interface in Kotlin with some generic types, so you can start doing more complex patterns. Again, you can see it's only subtle differences, and once you can read one, you can at least understand the other. So, in addition to the languages being so similar, there are tools now to allow development for iOS using Kotlin. There's also Swift on Android, but due to generally less encouragement from Apple to do things like it, it isn't quite as advanced. And I'm sure a few of you here are aware of Kotlin Native, which allows you to write Kotlin code for iOS apps. This is a really good way as well of learning a bit more about the iOS system as a whole, with a bit more of a familiar platform. It gives you access to pretty much all of the Cocoa Touch frameworks, which are the general iOS APIs. And it's a really good way to get familiar with the ecosystem without taking the complete jump over to Swift, if you don't like it, for example. Although it's great to say developing for both at the same speed and quality is ideal in the perfect world, sometimes it just isn't possible. Hiring is quite difficult, and growing a culture is even harder, I think. Sometimes the solution is to go for a cross-platform framework. These can save huge amounts of time and effort, although native development is always best, really. But yeah, it depends. A particular favorite, I'm sure a lot of you know of Flutter, written in Dart, and it's quite a lot of fun and quite different to what we're used to, with live updates, and it's just generally a bit quicker. There's been some really good talks on Flutter at this conference. I'm not going to go too much into it to save repeating what they've said. So I'd definitely check it out. And that's also another really cool way of learning a new technology and also being able to get a lot of access to the iOS infrastructure and understanding a little bit more about how UI works on iPhones, for example. Moving a little bit onto the tools that we use. So I work with iOS and Android developers quite a lot, and I'm sure a lot of you are probably aware that Fabric, the tool that we use for like beta, etc., is migrating fully over to Firebase. Now, a lot of iOS developers that I know don't really know a lot about what Firebase is, because we've never had to use it. So this is quite new territory, and they're unsure of what Firebase has to offer. I think as Android developers, it's a really, really good opportunity to introduce your iOS teammates to the tool and start to share knowledge and a better understanding of your users and your app's performance overall, because you can get an overall picture rather than it all being in separate places, which just makes you feel more separate. So by unifying the tools that we use, we automatically become closer and have so much more visibility of each platform, which in turn starts to allow us to view the apps as an overall product rather than separate. So in addition to this, at Monzo we were using different build systems for each platform until quite recently. So we've now moved both Android and iOS over to Circle CI. And we also have a mobile platform team whose focus is to improve the efficiency of our tools. And this move has allowed us to build scripts that cater to both platforms, reducing the repeated workload and sharing benefits between the teams. So things like automatically posting a summary on your pull requests with the tests that have failed, for example. So that's really, really cool. In terms of release process, we release once a week at Monzo, and this is done at the same time, well, as much as we can, at the same time on Android and iOS. It's quite a unified process, so there'll be a release stand-up on a Tuesday morning, and this switches every week, so there's a rota for the Android and iOS developer involved, there's a tester involved, there's a product owner involved as well, and they generally follow the whole process through and are responsible for different parts of the process. We have a channel for this as well, and it just generally gives quite a lot of visibility again to the other platforms' problems, or like what might pop up, what kind of things end up going into hotfixes, for example. And the problems with submitting a build to the App Store or the Play Store. More problems with the App Store. Again, the pictures keep disappearing. Anyway, so this also requires quite close collaboration with QA. Oh God, sorry, these slides are rubbish. And also product who coordinate it all. Right. Cool, so moving on from the more developer side of things, sometimes the work you get given to you needs to be in the right format to make the most of your time. So obviously we all know that Google provide the material design guidelines. Apple do provide design guidelines as well, and following these properly for each platform can result in the best user experience. So as an example, Monzo iOS was released quite a long, well, at least over a year before the Android app even started development, just because of who was in the team. This meant that we came across quite a lot of the problems I've spoken about when trying to get them up to feature parity. But now they're much more even. We're seeing a lot less issues here, and it's something we try to ensure that they're as equal as we can, or at least have the same amount of focus in terms of keeping both apps to a high quality. Something we do in particular is to ensure that we make designs for both platforms from the start. So as Android developers, I'm sure you're familiar with getting iOS designs and just being told to make it work. So this generally results in a subpar experience for Android users, rather than making the best use out of the Android system guidelines or what users are used to. And also by having designers part of our squads, we can ensure designers and developers work really closely together and spot any platform-specific issues early on and make sure, again, keep that feedback loop nice and tight. So to summarize overall, working together obviously benefits everyone, not just you, it benefits the whole team, your career progression, the product, the company, everyone's happier. You don't need to become a cross-platform developer. Obviously, it's quite a lot of work to be able to keep on top of both. I think just having a knowledge and respect as such for what the other platform do, I think is really important. And I think encouraging this culture of collaboration between all the way up from engineering to senior positions at your company is vital too. So what can you do? This is like an old copy, I think. No, yeah, it's all right. Try out pairing with an iOS developer. Just suggest that if you're working on a similar part of your app, or like you've both been given the same feature to build, try it out, see what happens. You might find that a lot of, especially the business logic, you'll be able to develop in the same way, depending on what architectures both platforms use, but still, it's quite an interesting exercise. Try experimenting with a cross-platform framework like Flutter, try out Kotlin native, see what works, try and just get a little bit of exposure to what iOS is about, or Android if you do iOS. And then, yeah, try and suggest having a mobile channel in Slack, if you don't already. You don't have to get rid of your Android and iOS ones, but generally having that shared space, it just starts the process off for that general culture. And yeah, that's pretty much it. This is me on Twitter. We're also hiring mobile developers. If anyone's interested, just give me a shout. I think we do have time for questions. I think you have to come up to mic if anyone's got one. But yeah.